We're doubling our defense spending by the end of this decade, and we're doing so in ways that build our domestic industries. And we are rapidly diversifying abroad.
Canada's military strategy is changing, and the shift is bigger than most people realize. A country that once bought defense platforms primarily through American pipelines is now evaluating options that redefine how it protects its sovereignty. The clearest signal comes from two fronts at once: Canada's fighter jet debate and its historic submarine procurement. Put together, they reveal a nation intentionally stepping out of the long shadow of U.S. expectations. In an era where President Donald Trump uses tariffs, threats, and political pressure to keep allies aligned with American industry, Canada is exploring defense partnerships built on capability, delivery, and mutual respect. And the more Trump tries to assert control, the more Canada moves toward suppliers who treat it as a sovereign nation rather than an extension of U.S. policy. For years, Canadian defense modernization was predictable. If a platform came from the United States, it was assumed to be the frontrunner. Today, that assumption no longer holds. Ottawa is openly considering a split fighter fleet, a combination of American F-35s already purchased and a potential second fleet, such as Sweden's Gripen. This is not a symbolic gesture. It is a strategic recalibration driven by three forces. First, Canada wants operational flexibility. Modern air warfare requires constant software upgrades, interoperability improvements, and electronic refresh cycles. The country selling the aircraft controls the pace of those upgrades. Depending on a single supplier means depending on a single government's political climate, a risk magnified under Trump. Second, Ottawa is deliberately reducing its exposure to U.S. political volatility. Washington has increasingly leveraged defense exports as bargaining chips in trade disputes. Trump's threats against Canadian aerospace, heavy industry, and even agricultural corridors have made policymakers wary of allowing any single partner to hold too much leverage. Third, a split fleet strengthens Canada's negotiation power. By signaling that F-35s are not the only option, Canada forces the United States to treat the relationship as a partnership rather than an entitlement. These fighter jet dynamics set the stage for the next, even larger transformation: Canada's submarine replacement. The logic is identical, but the stakes are far higher. Canada's patrol submarine project may become the defining military decision of the decade. Up to 12 submarines, a multi-billion-dollar investment, and a generational opportunity to anchor Canada's maritime power. But what makes this procurement extraordinary is not just its size. It is the fact that the United States is not even in the race. The competitors are Germany's ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems and South Korea's Hanwha Ocean. One offers unmatched stealth, the other unmatched industrial speed. Both bring long-term industrial cooperation. Neither requires Canada to hinge its maritime capability on U.S. export controls or political cycles. And that fact alone is reshaping the strategic map. Carney's tour of the South Korean shipyard during the evaluation phase remains one of the most symbolic images of Canada's new direction. The towering cranes, the scale of the production lines, the engineering depth, all of it represents a partnership built on competence rather than coercion. South Korea claims it can deliver 4 submarines in the early 2030s if contracts are finalized on schedule, with the full fleet completed the following decade. Germany emphasizes Arctic-ready design and acoustic superiority. Both approaches significantly outperform anything the United States could offer Canada today. What is emerging is a simple truth. Canada is not selecting a submarine. Canada is selecting a future. Canada's submarine decision is ultimately about something deeper than technology or timelines. It marks the moment when Ottawa begins shaping a defense identity that no longer defaults to American expectations. The fighter jet debate raised the question. The submarine program answers it. What makes this moment significant is the strategic independence Canada gains simply by having real alternatives. Evaluating South Korea and Germany on equal footing shows that Canada is willing to anchor key military capabilities outside the U.S. sphere. When doing so, strengthens sovereignty. This is not a rejection of the United States, but a recognition that dependence has become a liability in an era of political volatility in Washington. The Korean and German bids each offer a different model for Canada's future. Korea provides scale and industrial speed. Germany offers refined engineering and Arctic specialization. But the common thread is that both create a capability path where Canada, not the U.S., sets the pace of upgrades, operations, and long-term strategy. That in itself changes the balance of leverage across the border. Domestically, this shift aligns with a broader mood among Canadians who have watched Trump's trade tactics spill into aerospace, agriculture, and metals. A defense partnership that is insulated from those pressures resonates politically because it reassures Canadians that their security decisions cannot be weaponized in a tariff dispute. And when projecting forward, the implications become even clearer. A submarine fleet sourced from Asia or Europe opens the door to new industrial partnerships, new Indo-Pacific collaborations, and a level of autonomy in naval operations that Canada has never fully possessed. It gives Canada room to maneuver, not against the U.S., but alongside it, without being structurally bound to American policy swings. This is what makes the submarine project more than procurement. It is a strategic choice about the kind of power Canada intends to exercise over the next 3 decades, and the kind of vulnerability it refuses to accept anymore. Canada's military deals tell a unified story. From fighter jets to submarines, Ottawa is stepping beyond the old rulebook where American products dominated by default. Trump's attempt to weaponize dependence accelerated the shift. Carney's strategy is to turn that pressure into an opportunity, to build a military that reflects Canadian interests first, not American politics. Germany and South Korea are not simply competitors, they are symbols of a world where Canada chooses based on capability, partnership, and respect. And the United States is watching a reality it never prepared for. Canada is breaking free from long-standing assumptions, building alliances that strengthen sovereignty, and redefining the North American balance of power. The next move belongs to Ottawa. The choice it makes will shape Canada's military identity for a generation.
We begin on that profanity-filled rant by U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra. Hoekstra was at a high-profile event in Ottawa Monday meant to celebrate the Canada-U.S. relationship.
A witness says that he could be heard swearing, using the F word, and mentioning Doug Ford, his name, and that it appears that Pete Hoekstra was upset about this Ontario ad.
It began with a shocking outburst in the middle of Ottawa's most formal diplomatic evening. At a high-profile Canada-U.S. gala, U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra turned the room silent when he began swearing at Ontario's trade representative, David Patterson. Witnesses said the ambassador used profanity, even mentioning Doug Ford by name in front of diplomats and business leaders. The event was supposed to be a symbol of friendship. Every year, both countries raise their glasses for a joint friendship toast. But this time, only the Canadian side spoke. The American ambassador stayed seated. What should have been a quiet moment of goodwill turned into a public embarrassment and a sign of just how deep the rift between Washington and Ottawa has grown. The question now isn't just about one man losing his temper. It's about what that anger reveals, a frustration that runs straight from the Trump White House to America's closest ally. Ambassador Hoekstra's anger didn't come out of nowhere. He was triggered by an Ontario government ad that aired across U.S. television screens. The ad used the voice of former Republican President Ronald Reagan, warning about the dangers of high tariffs, the same ad that infuriated Donald Trump days earlier. Trump declared that all trade talks with Canada were terminated and threatened a new 10% tariff on Canadian goods. Within hours, the mood in Washington turned from tense to explosive. Hoekstra, a Trump loyalist, seemed to take that anger personally. But underneath the surface, the outrage had little to do with advertising. It was about control. For months, Washington has tried to pressure Canada to yield in ongoing trade discussions. Instead, Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford, stood firm. They used calm diplomacy and sharp strategy rather than panic. The Ontario ad became more than just a TV spot. It became a quiet statement that Canada would no longer play by Washington's intimidation rules. And that, perhaps, is what truly set the ambassador off. When diplomats start shouting, it's usually because their arguments are failing. Doug Ford's response was measured, confident, and unmistakably Canadian. Facing reporters, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult back. He simply called on the ambassador to apologize and move forward. He reminded everyone that Ontario's trade representative had done nothing wrong. He was defending his province in the face of constant attacks. Ford even used humor to lower the temperature, saying the cheese slipped off the cracker. But behind the humor was a powerful message. Ontario would not be bullied, not by tariffs and not by temper. Ford framed the moment as a defense of both his province and his country. He reminded Americans that Canada was being targeted, its auto industry, its steel sector, its manufacturing base. And he made clear that rolling over was not an option. When you attack our province, you attack our country, he said earlier this week. For ordinary Canadians, the scene felt familiar, frustration mixed with resilience. In Ford's tone, there was no hostility toward Americans themselves. He said, "We love Americans," separating people from politics. But he made no secret of how he viewed Trump's behavior. It was blunt, emotional, and deeply human, a reflection of how many Canadians now feel about their once trusted ally. While Ford was speaking publicly, Prime Minister Mark Carney remained silent, strategically silent. He was in South Korea at the time, attending the same summit as President Trump. The two leaders sat at the same dinner table, but didn't speak. Trump later posted online, "We didn't come to South Korea to see Canada." That silence, though, spoke volumes. Carney didn't need to trade insults. His policies have already begun reshaping Canada's trade position. Over the past months, Ottawa has finalized or expanded major economic agreements with the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and Australia. Canada is also deepening its investment links with ASEAN nations, a diversification strategy designed to reduce reliance on the U.S. market. In other words, while Washington has chosen confrontation, Ottawa is quietly building alternatives. Canadian exports to Asia and Europe are rising. New investments are flowing into critical minerals, nuclear technology, and advanced manufacturing. Former officials from both sides of the border have described the current climate as the lowest point in decades. John Manley, Canada's former deputy prime minister, said the relationship has shifted from partnership to performance, more theater than diplomacy. Gordon Giffen, a former U.S. ambassador under Bill Clinton, said ambassadors are supposed to deliver difficult messages, not profanity. He admitted that the outburst showed poor judgment and warned that the U.S. approach was undermining progress. Both men agreed that trust, once the backbone of the Canada-U.S. relationship, has been eroding fast. Canada's confidence in American reliability has been shaken. The United States, once seen as a predictable ally, now acts like a volatile negotiator. This breakdown is more than symbolic. Trade between the two countries accounts for nearly $800 billion a year, according to 2024 data from Statistics Canada and the U.S. Department of Commerce. But the tone from Washington is making long-term cooperation harder to sustain. What used to be a partnership of equals now feels like a power struggle. The results of Trump's trade offensive are now clear. Automakers like Stellantis and GM have pulled investment from Ontario, yet rising costs and inflation inside the U.S. are straining supply chains and angering American workers. Rather than isolating Canada, Washington has isolated itself. European and Asian partners are strengthening ties with Ottawa, while the U.S. loses diplomatic goodwill even among its closest allies.
Canada's leadership, meanwhile, has found a confident, steady voice. The Reagan ad, once a simple reminder of economic common sense, has turned into a symbol of how far U.S. trade policy has drifted from its own principles. Every insult from Washington only reinforces Canada's resolve to move independently. What Trump hoped would divide Canada has instead united it, around leaders determined to defend their economy and their dignity.
Back in Ottawa, the empty chair at the gala's toasts said more than any speech could. The United States, once Canada's closest friend, couldn't even share a glass of champagne. Carney's government continues its quiet path, expanding global partnerships, supporting industry, and rebuilding confidence. Ford stands publicly defending his province, demanding dignity and respect. Together, they reflect a new phase of Canadian identity. Steady under pressure, firm in principle. Meanwhile, Washington's outbursts keep making headlines. When ambassadors swear and presidents post insults, it doesn't show power, it shows frustration. In the end, Trump's tariffs didn't break Canada. They revealed its resilience. The louder Washington shouts, the calmer Ottawa seems. And in that silence, in the moment when only one side raised a glass, the world saw what real strength looks like.